All right, guys. I want to take some time today and again with the videos, but I feel like it's important that I get the same information out to all the classes. So I'm going to give you a leisure reading, some book talks. I've got several books that I've read that I think you would like. All sorts of kids would like these books from all sorts of reading levels. So I want to talk to you about them, and also tell you why we're doing this. So first and foremost, this leisure reading program is really important to me because I was about your age when I really started to value reading. It took me a while to really appreciate it. I guess more importantly, it took me a while um, to get to a point where I found books that I liked. I think that's the biggest problem is not being able to find books that you like. So often in your life, guys, you've been force fed books. Teachers have said, you have to read this book, it's required. To me, that automatically takes the fun out of it, like right off the bat. It takes all the fun out of it. I hate it no matter what it's about. So, my intention with this activity is that it's totally up to you. Yes, you have to do it, but what you read is, for the most part, totally up to you. And I try to read lots of different books, lots of different kinds of books, so that I can recommend lots of different kinds of books to you. So I know it sounds teachery, but one of the goals is to build lifelong readers, to build vocabulary, and to increase a general breadth of knowledge. There's things that I read about that I don't know about that it forces me to look up because we have these things in our hands and I'm reading something. I'll stop and look a word up or look up a term that I don't know. Or last night I looked up a drug that this guy took to stay awake and I never heard of it. And I looked it up. But that's just the fun thing about reading. And finally, to increase your appreciation for reading. So those are the four reasons why we're doing this. But let's get to the fun stuff. Let's get to the books. All right. So I have lots of summaries here of books that you can read from, and at the bottom, I write down what I think, whether it's easy, medium, or hard read. Um, this I think is a hard read. So I read this one last summer going into this school year. And what happens in this book is apparently some sort of apocalypse has taken over the United States. There are very few people left in the U.S. still alive. And this man and his son are alive. And they are traveling with all their worldly possessions in a shopping cart. And they are traveling to a destination, which I think is the coast, where they think it'll be safe. But all along the way are these, what I call road pirates, and they're just trying to kidnap, kill, sometimes even eat anyone they can in order to stay alive. I think guys mostly would like this book because it's kind of gory and kind of futuristic-y, sci-fi ish, but really excellent book. Some people think that it's the greatest book ever written. I think it's slow at times, but if you're into like this post-apocalyptic dystopian type stuff, then this would be a good book for you. All right, here's a really easy read. There's a kid at a school who does just enough to pass. Passing at the school is 60%. He stays just above failing so that he doesn't get in trouble. He is a drug dealer. All his customers are at the school. He's got to stay in school so he can continue to deal drugs. But he's dealing drugs for a really good reason. And this is a good, easy read. If and no shade at all here, but if you're someone who hasn't read a book for pleasure ever or in a super long time, this is the kind of book for you. It's easy. You can get through it pretty quick. It's a pretty likable character, even though he's a drug dealer. He's pretty likable, and I think a lot of guys read this last year. So that's called Mister 60%. This is a phenomenal book. Also, this is a book that was recommended to me by a friend who does not read. He is my age. He does not read, but he recommended this and another one because he'd read it. It is super easy to read. It does deal with some difficult issues. Suffice to say that this guy, uh, Josh Hamilton, was a super high draft pick, was playing minor league ball, was doing really well. He got hurt. He had never drank before. He started hanging out at a tattoo parlor to meet the guy, just hang out with the guys because he was hurt and he couldn't play and didn't have any close relationships with anybody on his team, on the players on his team. He met the guys at the tattoo parlor. The night that he took his first sip of alcohol was also the first night that he ever tried crack, if you can believe that. He got addicted to crack almost right away. And it's a phenomenal story about how he gets addicted to crack, works his way back into the major leagues, and wins the home run derby. I cannot recommend this book enough if you're into baseball, or not even have to be into baseball, but if you're into learning about recovery, it's a really a fantastic book. The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. This is a medium book. It is super popular. I read this book 3 or 4 summers ago. It is still on the New York Times top 10 list. A high school age girl is in a really tough spot. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, suffers from PTSD and alcoholism. Her mother is too scared to confront the dad, so as a result, they abandon their home in the American Midwest and try to start over and live life off the land in rural Arkansas. This is a phenomenal book. This girl falls in love with this young man, but the dad he continues to spiral into alcoholism and abuse of the family to where he becomes an evil guy. But this poor girl and her mom are way out, literally in the middle of nowhere, because a Vietnam War buddy willed the dad this tiny, tiny cabin way out in the middle of nowhere in Alaska. This is a phenomenal book. Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. This is all about how Nike got started. A guy named Phil Knight created the Nike shoe company. It talks about the portion of his life immediately following graduating from the University of Oregon through taking Nike public. It's a memoir. Okay, so if a biography is a story of someone's whole life, a memoir is a story of just part of their life. So this is just part of it. I don't want you to think. And I was kind of disappointed too when I read this book. I wanted it to be more about when Nike really blew up in my mind, through when they started making the Air Jordan brands in the early 90s. But it's a phenomenal story about persistence. My man Phil Knight went to China over and over and over and over and over again to get these Nike shoes built. A really great story. The Couple Next Door. This is probably, I would classify it as chick lit and chick lit / mystery, if you will. A young couple reluctantly leave their newborn baby alone when they go have dinner with their neighbors who live next door. Only thing is, the baby is gone when they get home. It's a twisty, turny story about someone who kidnapped a baby for the ransom. Only the new young couple has no money, so why would they ask for ransom from us? We're just a young married couple. We don't have a ton of money. Really fun, easy book. Dumpling. You guys may have remembered this book a couple of summers ago. Jennifer Aniston starred in it, and it was a movie on Netflix. An overbearing mom, played by Aniston, is the beauty pageant queen of her small town. Her full-figured daughter has always looked down her nose at pageants, but then one day she just decides to enter a pageant on her own. But the mom thinks it's disrespectful to pageants because, well, Dumpling doesn't look like a pageant girl. The bottom, that picture of that woman with the red lipstick, that's the author of the book. It's pretty good. I didn't love it, but my wife loved it, loved it, loved it. A lot of her friends loved it, but it deals with typical high school issues, typical body issues, acceptance of your body, those kind of issues that I think a lot of people would appreciate, especially what's popular with girls. Let's put it that way. All right. Somebody in one of my classes mentioned that they love April Henry. April Henry is a stud when it comes to easy, fast, fun, interesting thriller type books that always deal with high school aged girls, especially. A high school aged girl wakes up, her hands and legs are tied up in a car trunk. She has no idea how she got there. Find out how she got there and if she can survive this horror. I read this book 3 or 4 years ago, so forgive me if I forget the ins and outs, but I do know this. April Henry is a stud. She writes lots of books that are young adult books, and kids love them. So anything that she writes, I recommend. I know that I was looking on the Sora app on my phone last night, and there's a couple of April Henry books that are audio books that you can download on the free. Tell the Wolves I'm Home. This is a great book too. Follows the life of a girl named June, whose gay uncle has died of AIDS in the 1980s, and the subsequent friendship she develops with his boyfriend. So in the 1980s, like AIDS was like everyone thought that if you got AIDS, you died right away. And a lot of times you did. We have lots of medicines today that kind of keep it under control. But back in the 80s, it was a death sentence. And it's a really interesting story about a 14-year-old girl who becomes really close friend with her uncle's boyfriend who's died. So that's an excellent book too. This is so good. I recommend this book highly. And I've asked the librarian to buy a couple of copies, and she did. Get this. A high-powered New York City executive woman, she's a single mom, gets a weird phone call in the middle of the workday. Her straight A daughter has been accused of cheating and needs to be picked up from school immediately. The mom hustles to the school to get to the bottom of the story and pick up her daughter. Only thing is, when she arrives, she finds out that her daughter has jumped off the roof and died. Got to be more to the story, right? Got to be more to it. So the whole book is about that kind of stuff. Kimberly McCreek has this, but she also has a series of YA books that I've got to get deeper into, because I read another one of her books this summer. I think it was called A Good Marriage. It was excellent. Drew Brees. You may not know Drew Brees went to Austin Westlake up in Austin, obviously. Plays for my beloved Saints. He's a great dude. But there's a whole part of his life that occurred while he was with the San Diego Chargers, and before he ever run, and right when he got to the Saints. The Saints were horrible. Drew Brees had a terrible shoulder injury. It seemed like a match made in like low expectation heaven. No one thought anything would have come of this marriage, but obviously the Saints are one of the best teams ever, and Drew Brees is a first ballot Hall of Famer. But this is a really good book. I try to throw books like this in for the guys who there's a hook here. Hopefully, football story, a Westlake story, someone close to here. This book starts off, and he was a sophomore backup quarterback on the JV. And it didn't look like there was a clear path for him to ever become a starting quarterback at Westlake, but he did that year become a starting quarterback. And that's an interesting story. I highly recommend this one if it sounds interesting to you. What can you say about The Martian? It's kind of sciencey. I know many of you have seen the movie. Kind of sciencey, but really interesting. And it's like sci-fi, but it seems really plausible. This dude essentially is with a group of people on Mars doing some studying. He's a botanist. That's a guy who studies flowers. He's a botanist, but something happens, and he basically gets left behind on Mars all alone. It takes years to get back home, and it takes years to get to Mars. So this guy, Mark Watney, has got to find a way to stay alive with hardly any food for several years. Really cool story. If you're into science, if you're into math, if you're into fantasy a little bit, I thought it was a really good read. This is up there though with the books that are as good as the movie. So I think it's kind of a treat when you're able to read a book and then watch the movie and compare. So that's a really good one too. World War Z. This is a harder read, but people are still into zombies. Former United Nations investigator Jerry Lane and his family get stuck in urban gridlock, and he senses that it is no ordinary traffic jam. Turns out a lethal virus is turning healthy people into something vicious, unthinking, and wild. That means feral, wild zombies. The pandemic threatens to consume humanity, and Jerry leads a worldwide search to find the source of the infection and halt its spread. That's a really good one, too. Clearly, all these books are good. Otherwise, I wouldn't put them in here. This kid, Augie, he's a fourth grader, I think, and he's born with this really bad facial difference, let's say. He begins the book by saying, I won't describe what I look like. Whatever you're thinking, it's probably worse. He's starting fifth grade at Beecher Prep. He wants nothing more to be treated like an ordinary kid, but his new classmates can't get past his face and what it looks like. Wonder begins from Augie's point of view, but soon switches to include the perspective of his classmates, his sister, her boyfriend, and others. This book can be read in elementary schools, but my wife's good friend, who is an attorney, recommended it to me and to my students, and I thought it was excellent. The movie, however, is not good. All right, if you're a guy, you checked out, I need you to check back in. This is a dope story, true story of a guy named Frank Abagnale. It's also a movie. Saw it this summer. Frank W. Abagnale was one of the most daring con men, forgers, imposters, and escape artists in history. In his brief but notorious career, Abagnale faked being a pilot, faked being a doctor, faked being a lawyer, faked being a sociology professor. Oh, and by the way, he found out how to forge checks and cashed in over $2.5 million in forged checks, all before he turned 21. This is a great book. I read this one when I was a sophomore in college. I vividly remember reading it and reading it for fun during college. And it was a page turner. I couldn't put it down. Catch me if you can. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. You know what? I probably should take this one off. It's been a while since I read this. I remember that I loved it. I remember that it's told from the point of view of a boy who has who's mentally challenged. But it's a really fascinating read. Read through that, and if you're interested in it, I know we have copies of this in the library. Read this book last year. This kid had his brother was killed. His older brother was killed in a drive-by. He lives in a project in the inner city. It's a high-rise urban housing, free housing, and he's on his way down the elevator. And at every floor, he's deciding whether or not he's going to go after the guy who killed his brother, whether or not he's going to kill him. And it's a really interesting read, and it's an easy one. Many of you read Unbroken. On a May afternoon in 1943, an American military plane crashes into the Pacific Ocean and disappears. leaving only a spray of debris and a slick of oil, gasoline, and blood. Then, on the ocean surface, a face appeared. It was that of a young lieutenant, the plane's bomber, who was struggling to a life raft and pull himself aboard. That's how one of the most extraordinary sagas of World War II ever happened. And it's a phenomenal book, but also a movie. Tuesdays with Maury. This is a great story about an author who writes for the Detroit Free Press, I believe, as a newspaper writer. And he just spends every day, every Tuesday, with his mentor from college and the lessons he learns. It's an easy read. It's a great read. I read this in the year 2000. And I remember where I was when I read it, and I couldn't put it down. Scythe is set in the far future, where death by natural causes has been virtually eliminated thanks to advances in technology. The Scythedom is an organization that is tasked with deciding who must die. As overpopulation has remained a problem, the novel follows two teenagers, Citra and Rowan, who undergo training as they are recruited into the organization by Scythe Faraday. Yeah, so this is a cool book, and a cool premise in that every illness has been cured. The only problem with that is no one ever dies. So overpopulation is a real problem. They got to find a way to cull some of the people from the earth so we don't strain our resources too much. How do you decide who gets killed? Well, scythes do that. And so really a cool story. There's several of them, several books. I just read the first one. This one's really good. And Lawn Boy, finally, this is the last one. It's an easy read. I pulled it off the shelf last winter and read it. This 22-year-old guy is stuck. He lives with his mom and his 300-pound special needs brother. He loves landscaping and mowing lawns, but this career is not going to allow him to get out on his own. Several people try to help him out, but he's just trying to figure himself out. And it's a really excellent book. I recommend it. So those are just a handful of books that I've read recently that I think you might like. I'm going to have you give me some feedback on this Google form here in a second. And I'll see you in class.